I got admission into Dartmouth College, and I would attribute part of that success also to the SAT because it was able to boost my profile. So I scored a 1550 in the SAT. I scored 800, a perfect score in maths, and a 750 in the English and language section.
Welcome to the College Crest podcast. This show brings you insight into your college readiness preparation, whether it's test prep, academic, or building your profile. And today is a special episode. Malay joining us, a brilliant student who not only mastered the digital SAT, but also got the admission at prestigious Ivy Dartmouth. So, Malay, I welcome you to the show. We're glad to host you as a part of this podcast series.
Thank you. Thank you so much, sir. Really happy to be here and very grateful for your invite. Um, and looking forward to how this podcast can help in terms of the digital SAT and help students understand the SAT better and the entire process in terms of getting into a good college in the future.
Sure, Malay, right? So I'll pick your brain and pick out those
100%.
ideas which might be very important for the upcoming aspirants, right? So first up, right? Why is digital site so important? Because everyone talks about it, and sometimes there's a confusion whether it is required, not required. So why it is important?
I feel the digital SAT, especially now, has got so much importance, and students are somewhat running away from it during the pandemic, saying that universities have become test option. But the entire trend is changing with some of the top universities again converting back into the digital SAT. So Dartmouth number one was test compulsory for the year onwards from class of 2029,
Right.
and Howard, Yale, and Brown, and all the universities have followed suit. And I'm quite sure that the digital SAT is something which is going to come back, and its importance is so prevalent because it gives a standardized measure to see the attributes and the talents of a student in terms of an academic standpoint. And it gives not only helps in merit scholarships, it also helps students in boosting their application overall. And so without a doubt, the SAT is very, very important, very prevalent in today's time. And I think it's a very good academic example of your talents in a standardized setup.
Understood. So what I kind of summarize that it is must to do now. It's not optional anymore. Is the
Perfect.
sense I'm getting. So Malay, thanks for highlighting the importance of SAT, right? And one question that I really want to ask first up is when you started preparing for digital SAT. So what were some of the initial strategies or roadmap that you built to plan your study?
Yeah. So I would break this down into about 5 steps. Number one is identifying which test you want to focus on by giving the diagnostic. And of course, for me, it was the SAT, but I would always recommend give the diagnostic for both. Understand which area you're stronger in, and then stick to that test end to end.
So
And
when you say both, this is SAT and the ACT you are
SAT
comparing.
and the ACT, that's correct.
Okay.
So identify which test you have a strong suit in, and then work on it end to end and make sure you ace the test eventually. Do not try your best not to deviate from the test you select, because when you have to work in the future to change, it will always be difficult. Also, I would say focus on having a timeline set that within 3 months I'm going to be giving the SAT or the ACT, whatever the case, and you're going to work accordingly, work backwards from those 3 months and say, I've got this much time and this is what I need to cover in those 3 months. So that is step one. Step two would be to identify your strengths and weaknesses within the test. So for me, I noticed earlier on that math was quite strong for me. I was able to get a good score in math from the very beginning. My diagnostic scores itself were quite good, whereas English was always somewhat of slackening. I was always not able to reach that high score I was hoping for and aiming for. And I realized later on that math can be perfected, can be fine-tuned, because there's only a certain number of concepts they can ask you. Right. So once you get an understanding of each question, each concept, and each type of question, you cannot go wrong in math. It's very black and white. But the thing is, in English, there's a lot of shades of gray. There's a lot of unknowns and unidentified, unquantifiables, which you will not be able to see prior to the exam. So English required a lot of practice. Math, however, once you got all the concepts in place, then it was just a routine of giving tests, and your score would say somewhat similar. So that was step two for me, identifying where I was weak and where I was having a good hand over it. Then step three was getting the concepts in place. So once the math concepts were there, I was extremely confident with math, and I knew that I need to get a full perfect score in math, because there should be nothing holding me back from scoring an 800. Because if I know all the concepts, there's this book, and in the book they've told you all these are the concepts of math. There's nothing beyond outside this book. So once you've read the whole book, you cannot go wrong. So once you've understood all the concepts of math, you cannot possibly go wrong. And that's why I wanted to aim to maximize my math score. On English, on the other hand, even English has a lot of rules, punctuations, grammar, subject verb agreement, and even that requires a lot of fine tuning. But now things like vocabulary, things like identifying which sentence will be placed where, these are always difficult, and it's on the spur of the moment thinking what you need to do. This exact cannot be exactly practiced and mimicked like the exam setup. So English was always a tad bit lower than my math, and English required a lot of more of my effort. So step three was I was identifying how I can get the concepts right and how I can overall increase my pace, which I came to in step four. So in step four, it was mainly the last lap of the SAT, last 1.5 months before the exam. And with the math concepts in place, math became somewhat of autopilot. I was just giving the exam, but I was mainly giving it for English and improving my score. In math, I would consistently get 790, 780, and a high score in math because, as I said, concepts equals perfect. And English is again, you just as you get a hang of it, you will get a keen sense. It's not, you can't say it in words, but you will over time you will get an understanding of how the questions in English are. So you will get a understanding of the rules, and then the difficult questions will somewhat fall in place with practice. So again, for me, math number one, English was taking a lot of time of mine. So I focused a lot on the weaker section, which was English. And finally, step five was only giving the mocks, only giving the diagnostic tests. And once you perfect the diagnostic tests, once you get that feeling of being in that exam setup with that clock ticking down the time, and once you get that feeling of pressure that I've only got 55 minutes or whatever the time is, and I have to finish in 2 hours to finish the entire test, you can feel that you're in the exam hall, and enough mimicking or redoing of that before the test will get you prepared for being in the actual exam hall that will get you to ace the exam. So mock exams always number one.
Right. Yeah, Malay. And I think thanks for breaking down those steps out there, right? Starting with the diagnostic, building your concepts, right? Identifying the strong and the weak areas out there. And then over a period, as you build your concepts, you build your speed also
Yes.
with different strategies that come into place. And yeah, and I think the last point that you mentioned, sitting in an exam like environment, right? Those simulated mock tests, full length tests are very, very critical.
Surely.
Right. So, Malay, moving on. So, can you list down some of the challenges that you face, and what kind of strategies you develop to overcome them?
I understand. Great. To be very honest, this is not a very common answer to hear, but I would say balance is overrated. It is not possible to be as efficient as a machine. It's not possible to have everything chopped out. It's not possible to be able to do extracurriculars and academics, school academics, SAT, and prep for everything and do 100 things at once. It just sometimes doesn't work out. So you need to take things as it comes. Do not get overwhelmed. Make sure you in the week you have enough time to work on the SAT. Devote enough time weekly. If you cannot do daily, that's completely all right, because high school is the most paranoid, crazy time they're going to spend with so many different things all over the place. And for me, there was no perfect structured curriculum that I'd set for myself. There was no perfect timetable. So you just take things as they come, and challenges will be dime a dozen. You cannot preempt everything, but that's that's the beauty of it, I would rather say. So you just make sure that on a weekly basis you're setting yourself on the right track. You're progressively improving, and extracurriculars and all will fall in place accordingly. But you need to, of course, take out time. So there might be days you will spend 5 to 6 hours on the SAT, and there might be days when you just don't look at it at all because time doesn't allow you to do so. So as I already have said, set weekly targets, achieve those targets, and there's nothing holding you back.
Right, and I think that that's an interesting way to approach it because different students approach it differently, right? So we work with a lot of students, and what we do is we build a roadmap for the students, right? So in certain months they focus. Of course, they do try to achieve a balance, but certain months are more focused on the profile building. Other months are focused on SAT, especially the summer months. So a lot of students who work with us during their summer months, they prepare for SAT and go very intense because they would target sometime around May or August SAT that they would be giving post their grade 11 as soon as they enter into the senior year. Right. So interesting perspective. Right. So if we look back in terms of what you have done, right? So you followed a certain approach, right? Is there anything that you would like to change in terms of the approach that you took while you prepared for SAT?
So in terms of approach, I think students put a lot of pressure on themselves. So to give an example of my own situation, when I gave the SAT in May, I studied for 6 months for the SAT and I banked everything on that. I put a lot of pressure on myself to get a high score. And when I eventually did get 1500, I was disappointed that I had not crossed the 1500 threshold, was aiming for a 1550 always. And when you put so much pressure on yourself, you're just somewhat limiting your own confidence. So if I have to look at it, if I have to describe SAT in one word, after all the hard work, all the struggle, it's all about confidence. And that day, if you go in the exam hall knowing that you've done everything you possibly could, you're going to sail through. And that's what eventually happened when I gave the SAT again in October. I already was knowing myself that I've scored a 1500, and I was just going to give that attempt to see how it works out. I was confident. I couldn't be bothered about what eventually would happen, and it just worked out perfectly. So if I were to say one thing, I would say just take it one step at a time. Do not get overwhelmed. Do not get bogged down. When I got a 1390, I was devastated. But I realized that I need to do inward thinking and realize that 1-2 weeks of preparation is not going to work. That attitude will not work. And so it's always a long journey. And with the amount of resources that are available right now, Blue Book itself has sent out almost 4 practice tests, if I'm not incorrect. And all those tests are a good indicator of how much you can score. So pace those tests out accordingly. Make sure you use the best of your time, and you will have a great time working for this SAT, because after a point it becomes a pattern and it becomes a part of you, and you're able to understand the test quite well. So it's nothing to be scared of. And for the students who will be applying in 2026, there's almost 1.5 years, 2 years before you even apply. So there's a lot of time and a lot of time to work on the SAT and fine tune all the aspects which you might be rough with, and everything will fall in place eventually.
Right. And Malay, I think the point you made is confidence, right? So that's the one key word. And confidence, I believe personally comes with practice, right? Because if you have practice a lot, you have practice in the right way. When you enter the examination hall, it's just another day, right? So doing a lot of time tests at home, building that stamina, sitting over for 2 to 3 hours continuously, I think plays a very, very important role. And one thing that I tell a lot of our students also is, if you're outside the examination hall, you can solve any SAT question because the questions are really very simple. But because you're inside the examination hall and you have this time pressure, that's where the mistakes happen, right? And the way I look at it is, it's a combination of accuracy and speed. While you spend a lot of time initially to build accuracy, build your concepts, develop, understand different kind of questions that come in the examination, over a period, you also figure out strategies how to solve them faster. And that is something at Let's Unbound we are very focused on, where we initially focus on the foundation prep and then help students build their strategy as they go into the SAT examination with confidence. Good. So I think those were some good ideas, Malaya. So if anybody has to start today, right? So are there some, top 2 to 3 tips that you would like to share, some key resources that the student can refer? Is there a timeline, right? Anything, which you believe would be meaningful for the student. So any top 2 to 3 tips will be really helpful.
So when I say confidence is key, there's no limit to the number of SAT tests you can give. But again, it's an expensive proposition. So I would say limit yourself to about 3 tests. 3 tests is a nice round figure. And ensure that you have about 3 months of preparation before you go for the first exam. Don't rush into it. Don't make a mistake like I did. When I was just rushed into it in 2 weeks, and we all know what happened. So always take it slowly. Make sure you have enough time to prep for the first exam you give. And the first exam you give will give you confidence the second, and the second most likely will be your last, and if not, the third will be top notch. And so that would be tip number one. Be slow with the whole process. There's no rush. But I again repeat that do not delay the SAT saying that, oh, I have exams right now, or I have a tournament right now, or I have this extracurricular activity I need to focus on. Give the test. As I said before, it's going to be a jumble of all things in these next 1.5, 2 years that you have. There's going to be 101 things and more which you have on your head. But still make the time to give the test, because if you delay it, that's what happened with me. I delayed it for 6 months till May, and then I delayed it for another 3-4 months till October. And it was extremely close, cutting it too fine. So I would not recommend this to anyone. I would recommend have it done by 5 to 6 months before the November deadline, before your applications go out. So that's tip number one. Tip number two is just keep fine-tuning the practice. Just fine-tune the portion that's available. It is a certain range of, say, the portion is from year to year. It's all you need to cover. There's nothing beyond it. The resources on the net, everything covers that portion quite well. There are a certain number of topics. So just focus on the topics you're weak at, and the topics you're easy at will just you'll be able to smooth through easily, because of the practice, you'll keep getting better. And number three, and this tip, do not take lightly. I think this is the most important. After a point, practice is only what is necessary. As so already has mentioned, once you're in that setup, when you have those 2 hours before you, you have a time setup. That's what mimics the exact test you're going to be giving in the exam hall. And as I mentioned, I've given 11 tests before I got my 1550. And that is exactly what you need to do as well. The week before the test, or the month before the test, you just need to give every week, you need to give on the weekend, the Saturday and Sunday, 2 mock tests or 3 if you think you have the capacity to go ahead. But review each test, review each answer as is the most important answer in that test. And when you review your mistakes, you'll be able to identify what the weak links are and what your positive strengths are. And as you fine tune your tests, you will realize that your scores will just keep going up and up. So practice and the mock test available is the most important tool you have right now, and the amount of resources. You cannot go wrong by giving mock tests. And that stands true for any case in life. Keep practicing and the scores will speak for themselves.
Right, Malay. And I think that's a very valid point because I see a lot of students, they're very good at concepts, right? But when they sit for the examination because they have not given enough test, they either, feel tired after doing the initial 1 or 2 sections, right? And then they lose marks over there. So they have not really built their stamina. And I think that's very, very important in the last 30 to 45 days, as you suggested. Every weekend, we should have a testing done in an exam simulated environment, right? It's not that we just do
Yes.
section one and then go away for a break, then go section two. That is not going to work out, right? So as students will have to sit and develop that habit, right? And one thing that I always tell my students is if you have to run 100 meter, you have to plan for 150 meter, right? So build stamina to sit for 3.5, 4 hours. I know it's tough, and especially in today's time, but that's the differentiator out there. It's about if you're able to sit and build that stamina, you would surpass 50 to 70% of the other students out there in terms of the stamina building that you're doing, right? So three fundamentals, right? Confidence, which comes from building your accuracy and speed. So I would say those are the first two fundamentals. And third is, familiarize yourself with the examination as much and sit for those hours to build that stamina.
Yeah, and to add to Sir's point, there is a break in the middle of your 2 exams. Never get up from the table, never use that break. Sit on the table for those 10 minutes. Any mock test you give will have 2 sections. Number one, the English, and then the math. Sit throughout those 2 hours, not stop your test and say, oh, I'll do the next section the other day. Because that's how you get that exam set up in place.
Right.
Exactly 10 minutes in the middle, sit on the table, visualize what needs to be done next, and then sit for the next 1 hour for the maths, and do not delay the math to another day. That's you should always remember that the SAT is a time test. It's a ticking time bomb, rather. So if that gets it more strenuous. It's always about time. If you ever struggle, it's going to be with time. You will know the concept, but you will not have the time to implement it. So always keep enough buffer. Make sure that you can finish it. Like Sir mentioned, the 100 meters should be run in the same amount of time you can run the 150. So you have that much extra space or that extra leeway to make an account for any mistakes you may do on the day of the exam. So never underestimate the time factor, because the concepts will be there, but if you don't have the speed, it's all going to fall flat.
Right. And valid point, Malay, right? And the point is to keep it simple, right? Because what happens is while there are a lot of resources online, a lot of strategies, a lot of communities, we end up, finding a lot of resources, finding a lot of information here and there, and, trying to figure out stuff while, it's all laid out. And, as a part of this podcast, we'll provide our viewers a structured plan. If they want to prepare by themselves, they can do, and they don't have to worry looking at 10 books, looking at multiple forums. Just pick up 1 or 2 key resources, focus on them, and do end to end. And I think you should be thorough because it's basic math and reading and writing after all, in a time tested manner. I think that's the critical piece. Okay, Malay. So I think a lot of interesting insight, Malay. And at times, Malay, I've seen students have a lot of questions, right? And instead of detailing out, given the limited time we have, I would like to have a rapid fire with you, right? Where I'll ask you probably the top 6 to 7 questions that student come across, and then you can share your perspective of them.
Sure,
right? The first question is, and I know it's a very subjective question, what's a good range for a SAT score?
So I feel this is going to be a slightly tricky question to answer. The thing is, now with the competition in university applications going sky high, top university acceptance rates are falling below 5%, 6%. I would always recommend a 1500, 1550 plus for any top university which has a below 10% acceptance rate. And I think you should set that as a goal. That shouldn't be that why even a 1450 or a 1500 is good. I say go above 1550. But if you want a range, then for the ACT, I would say 34 to 36 is quite remarkable. And then for the SAT, depending on the university, again, 1480 to 1600 is a quite a good score. But again, try to stay for 35 in ACT and above, then that's great. And 15, 20, 15, 30 in SAT and above, again, that's great. So that's a good indicator. And at the end of the day, it's not about the 10 points here and there. There's also a lot of other factors that go into your application. So the university is not only looking at, oh, this student's got 1550 and this got 1540. So he's better than the other. There's a lot of other aspects in your application.
Right.
So don't make the SAT be all end all. While it is very important, know that there's a lot of stuff beyond the SAT. So don't have the mindset that if I get a 1600, I don't need to work on the other aspects. There's each aspect of an application is important in itself. And a good score doesn't mean you can bypass the other requirements.
Definitely, right. And I think that's a valid point, right? SAT cannot take care of, the weakness in other areas, right? It's just a prerequisite, right? And Malay, the way we would do it, we'll do rapid fire. So I would also request maybe in 2 lines you can finish your answer so that our audience can then, get the benefit of a lot more questions. So you mentioned you have given 3 attempts. So is there a good thing about giving multiple exam attempts, or there's a bad thing? So that's something, again, a lot of students have a question.
So the misconception is that you have to give the SAT in a certain number of attempts and the university will look down on your application if you've given multiple attempts. That is all false. A university doesn't know how many attempts you've given. You can choose to report the number of attempts you want to. So mostly people do a super score with 2 attempts. So I gave 3, you can give 3, you can give 4. There's no limit. But I would always recommend 3 is a good number of attempts and keep going on an upward trend, and that's all you need.
Right. And I've seen students who are, who do wonderful in the first attempt itself, right? So the idea is, should we say the max should be 3, right? Anything beyond might be too much, right? Because I think in the 3 attempts, you also figure out, whether you are able to score or not, right? Because, I've seen most of the students do good by 2 attempts, and the third one is, where they really want
Just to amp up the
maximize their scores.
Yeah, so with the digital SAT, again, I feel digital SAT is a somewhat easier than the pen and paper SAT. That is my opinion. So if you think you can ace it in 2 attempts, that is also great. There are so many people who've done it in 1. So this is very subjective based on how you view the exam and how your confidence levels are before the paper and what the score eventually is. So I think do not go overkill with more than 3. Focus 1, 2, 3 and choose which is you perfect.
Definitely. And you mentioned the word super scoring, right? So again, this comes out a lot of questions. What is super scoring, and should we even attempt for it?
So again, super score is accepted by all universities. So it doesn't mean if you have super score, your application is less than or on a lower pedestal than someone else's. Super score is where you take the highest in one section in one exam and the highest in another section in another exam. So if you're taking, so say for example, if you take 800 in math in one exam, you can practically not study for math in the second section and just focus on the English part, and you can aggregate the scores together and get a super score. So you could take English from one attempt and math from another attempt, add them together, and that's your super score.
Okay. And does the college app allows you to put your super scores?
So college applications do allow you to put your super score. They will, however, know that you've done a super score because you will be selecting that I'm reporting 2 SAT attempts. So they will know you've done a super score, but at the end of the day, a high super score and a college is not going to care. You get a 1580, the college is not going to question you that why have you got a 1580 with 2 attempts and not 1. So super score is not looked at negatively. So do not be having the misconception that you will be on a lower rank or a lower pedestal if you have a super score.
Okay, because I hear different perspective, right, in terms of when we are looking at super score. So I think one perspective you're sharing is go for it, right? There's an opportunity if you're giving multiple SATs. Right. And another question I think you also mentioned when I asked you in terms of the good range. So I see a lot of students also, confuse what should we do? Should we go for SAT? Should we go for ACT? So how would you decide, and how did you decide? I think you mentioned your friends were doing it, that's why you did it. But now you have given it. Are there some learnings that you would like to share with us?
Yeah. So the reason I chose SAT was because a lot of prep available, material available, and I had heard that the ACT has a science component. And that is, again, partially true, partially false. So to just explain it further, SAT and ACT are quite identical in their testing methods. Some focus more on English, some focus on more on math. But I think you give a diagnostic for both and you get a clear understanding of where you're scoring well and where you're not, because each have a different way of timing and scoring you section wise. Now the SAT has only English and math. The ACT has 4 different sections. So the technicalities are a lot, but at the end of the day, the testing mechanism and the what they are testing is quite similar. And in terms of the science section, it is not as a it's rather a comprehension which has a science topic. So there is no requirement to have a knowledge of this of a certain science before, and rather it's just math and English in both the exams. So again, there's a lot of diagnostic tests available. In fact, I think Let's Unbound has some fantastic free diagnostic tests available for all students. So you can choose to give a test for both and see where you are scoring better, and then eventually go down that route. So there is no right or wrong in this.
Right. And do you recommend preparing for both, or you should focus only on one?
No, so both is it's completely pointless. So because the university values each equally, there is no SAT is greater than ACT or vice versa. Each test is equal in its own right, and there is no benefit really for preparing for both. Rather, if you feel that you've taken the path of ACT and now you're somewhat struggling, you can always change to SAT later on in the future, if or vice versa again. But there's only sense in preparing for one, acing the one exam and not looking at the other, because both are again identical in terms of the importance colleges give them.
Understood. So you're suggesting choose one rather than, trying to excel at both
Perfect. Yes,
out
do
there.
not try both, because it's then jack of all, master of none.
Right. Makes perfect sense, Malay. Right. So I think it's been a insightful discussion so far, Malay. Is there anything probably I missed asking you would like to share with the audience before we, move towards the closing of our discussion?
Yeah, so no, actually, all bases have been covered, all points have been noted. But if just one thing I could say, then I would say that SAE is not actually, even the ACE, it's not what we make it to be. It's not that difficult an exam. It just requires some practice. Though, in fact, the portion is easier than some of the exams in the ISC and IB level curriculum in maths and English. Sometimes that surpasses the SAT. So SAT is a prerequisite. It's a benchmark to get your foot into the door in top universities. And do not get nervous or overwhelmed with the exam. It is a very free flowing exam and you will be able to get past it with the right practice. So do not overthink it too much, do not get too scared of it, and it'll all work out well in the end.
Yeah, really appreciate. And I think, Malay, this has been a really insightful hearing about your SAT prep and the strategies that you followed. So thank you for sharing your experience with all of us today.
Not at all. Thank you so much.
Right. And I think everyone who's been listening to us, we hope this discussion of the College Crest podcast was helpful for you. And if you are preparing for the set, right, so remember the right combination of the consistency and the strategies are going to be your tools for success, right? And it's simple, right? And the idea is, I believe sometimes there's so much more information available than we really needed, and that's where it creates a confusion, right? So the idea is to follow simple strategies, simple content, basic level math and reading and writing, and practice really well in the simulated exam environment. You would be excelling your way, right? And don't forget to check more episode of the College Crest for the insight, the stories in terms of your college preparation. And yeah, I would highly recommend, and we'll share a link in the comment box where you can find more resources which are freely available on the internet. And if you want to give a diagnostic test, we would provide that complimentary to our listeners. So thanks for tuning in, and we look forward to bringing more useful tips and strategies in our upcoming episode, right? So keep learning, keep working towards your college application. Thank you, Malay, for joining us
Thank you,
today.
sir. It's been my
Really
pleasure to
appreciate
be
that.
here, and I really hope this podcast has helped students in understanding or getting a partial insight as to what is part of the SRE and what my journey was. And I hope I've been able to help or answer a few questions regarding the same. Again, I'm no master on this topic either. Even I was a student just a few months back. So I hope whatever I was able to share has given a few insights and will help students in the future.
Right, and it's very meaningful because we do get to see all the perspective, right? So as educators, we do have a certain perspective of years of teaching and learning. But when we hear from somebody like you who has done it, in the past months and bringing in a fresh perspective, that's always helpful for the peer group. So all the best again, Malay, and thanks for joining in.
Thank you so much, sir. Looking forward to having more podcasts in the future.
Yeah, thank you.